Now, what's next for Ireland in the Brexit negotiations for 2018? Joining me is Brian Hayes, MEP. Brian, let's start first with what happened in the reshuffle. We've got a new Northern Ireland Secretary. James Brockenshire, of course, had to resign due to medical reasons. Karen Bradley now takes the role. How important was he? How significant was he in terms of the UK-Ireland relationship? And is it actually better having a new face to bring a fresh set of ideas?
Well, at the end of the day, whoever is the Northern Ireland Secretary from the British Cabinet is going to have a pivotal role on the island of Ireland and will have a huge responsibility to work closely with our Foreign Affairs Minister Simon Coveney and our government. I suspect at this stage the fact that James Brockenshire is ill, firstly we wish him every recovery. That the job has been given to someone else now will create a bit of a vacuum for a period of time. But I mean, the priority is the same for the British and Irish governments. It's to get the Northern Ireland Assembly up and working, the executive working, and collectively to do what they can to actually bring that about. So I don't see any fundamental change in policies. I wish the new Secretary of State every success. It's a difficult job she has. And in fairness to James Brockenshire, he had a very difficult job as well, because not only was the Assembly brought down this time last year by the decision of Sinn Féin at the time, but also he had to negotiate and manage to manoeuvre the fact that the DUP are effectively supporting the Conservatives in Westminster, and that's not an easy thing to do. So we hope that the new Secretary of State will do well in her new post. I have no doubt she will.
Now let's talk about the future for the Brexit negotiations for Ireland. Now, where do you see the island's priorities in terms of the next few months, the next 10 months up until getting some kind of clarity on a deal? What do you think Ireland is pushing for?
Well, Ireland's pushing for a full implementation of the guidelines and agreement we got in phase one, and they will inform all of the negotiations on the European side on phase two. But what we really want to see is a long-standing, durable, sustainable trade deal with the UK, because it's in our interests and the interests of other net exporting countries to the UK that we get that.
One of the things which is always intriguing to me is that obviously Ireland and the UK share a very special relationship, and particularly in trade, a very strong relationship. But obviously Ireland has to share a policy with EU 27, the 26 other states as it would be. How is Ireland going to achieve what it wants whilst also ensuring that it has a completely homogenous trade relationship amongst the other EU states as well with the UK?
That's going to be the challenge here, because we want the best possible deal with the UK, as the UK want, and other member states. I was speaking to Danish colleagues today, Belgian colleagues, Dutch colleagues, German colleagues. They're all huge net exporters to the UK, so they don't want to see any disruption into the future. But equally, the 26 others want Ireland to make sure and support that the integrity of the single market is not in any way challenged as a consequence of Britain leaving the UK.
I mean, what's going to be interesting perhaps, is, and interested to hear your thoughts on this, is net exporting countries. Do you see that when the reality and the grittiness of these negotiations start to kick in the next few months, when the details of the trade arrangements, and particularly to do with anything from agriculture to electricity or whatever, these countries are going to actually start unifying, and the EU's 27 is going to become slightly more fractured between those who are exporting and those who are not?
That's more than likely in the context of these negotiations, because we're now getting into the meat of the vested interest of every member state. And let's be frank about it, many member states have no difficulty with Brexit because it doesn't affect them. But for countries like our own and others, it's a huge domestic concern in terms of the future direction of our economy. So it's more than likely, I think, that we will get into very choppy waters over the course of the next year as to how we negotiate this. And I think that's going to be a challenge for the 26 as much as it is for the UK.
But how is Ireland going to get its voice heard and put its case forward sufficiently so that it is able to protect the export economy it has?
Crucially working with others.
I mean, how strong is Ireland prepared to be as one of the 27 is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I think Ireland will work with other member states who are in the same position, the net exporting countries, the countries who have huge skin in the game, the countries who stand to lose a lot if things go badly wrong. But equally, we have to have our responsibilities to the 26, because we've got to make sure that as we go, hopefully from a deal to a transition to then a wide-ranging trade deal, that this does not provoke some kind of systemic threat to our financial stability, and we make sure that the progress that the Eurozone has made is accelerated over the next few years, not decelerated as a consequence of Brexit.
I just put it to you then, if push comes to shove and you have to pick where on the scale you're going to go between Irish interests in terms of the economy, in terms of trade with the UK, and its place within the EU and the EU 27 and the EU unity. Where will Ireland? Where will the government?
I think the Irish government have been very successful in the last 12 months or so in making sure that Irish interests are EU interests. I think we saw that quite clearly.
That's not going to be the case in the nitty-gritty, as you've said, because there is these differences.
We've got to make sure that we persuade as many people as possible within the Council, within the negotiating team, that it's in Europe's interest that we have the closest possible alignment to the UK. That's in not only the UK's interest, but it's also in the interests of Ireland and other member states of the European Union. We don't want to see the UK as some kind of third country a million miles away like a Mexico or a Japan. We see the UK as a central player within Europe. And the fact that they are leaving is something we regret. They can't have the same rules of access, they're not going to get the same benefits, but at the same time we shouldn't punish the UK with a policy which would actually bring more harm on Europe in the long run.
Okay, Taoiseach Leo Varadkar is obviously in the European Parliament next Wednesday, giving a speech. What would you like to hear him say? What does he need to say, in your opinion?
I think it's an important speech. It's his first speech to the European Parliament since he became Taoiseach last year. He's very pro-European. He believes that the European Union is Ireland's common home, and we're very committed to the European Union despite the fact that the UK are leaving. What I think he needs to say really is, for the last 40 years Ireland has done very well from the European Union. We have doubled the number of people who work in Ireland. Our economy is now motoring ahead. It's a much more prosperous place than it was in the early 1970s, where emigration to the UK and to the States was there. So I think I'd like him to see what can Ireland bring to the European Union as a small member states, which is around the future direction of the European Union.
But fundamentally, surely he has to have in that speech, but I am representing the Irish government and Irish interests. I mean, surely at somewhere along the line he's going to have to decide politically where he's going to go down, whether he's going to support EU 26 states in terms of a far more diluted policy with the UK, a far less beneficial one for Ireland.
We don't know the outcome of that. No one knows the outcome of that. He's got to be a persuader for the kind of solution that we want. But equally, he has to set out his vision for a small member state of its future relationship with the European Union, where we stand on defence and security, where we stand on the question of migration, where we stand on the question of opt-outs, where, for instance, in previous negotiations, we've had to follow the British line on opt-outs because Britain have taken the position we were too small. So there's a lot of hugely important issues for Ireland in this, irrespective of the question of Brexit, that we have got to, I think, transform our relationship with the European Union into being a much more positive member, and a member actually that is prepared to pony up responsibilities.
Would Ireland and the Irish government and Leo Varadkar ever consider, I mean, it was floated in the early days, but it's come up again now, the concept that it might actually be more beneficial for Ireland to leave the European Union and join a deal with the UK?
No, because actually
ever is feasible.
No, because the majority of our trade is not with the UK. The majority of our trade is with the 26 others. And in the last 5 and 10 years, the biggest volume of increase in exports on financial services, on the services side, but also on the actual goods side, has been to the European market. We are part of the Eurozone. Were we to leave the Eurozone, we would become some kind of sub-currency of sterling, and we all know what happens in the 1970s when we were. Every time the UK changed its interest rate, we had to change ours. So, no, this is not there are people in Ireland, a minority of people, who would like to see an Ireland exit, but the great majority of people in the country and of political parties want to see Ireland fully integrated with the European Union. We've got to defend our interests in this, but this does not give rise to a Brexit on Ireland's basis.